Dust motes danced in the pale moonlight that spilled through the arched window, swirling lazily in the still air as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. The silence was so complete that even the faintest movement seemed to echo, magnified by the emptiness of the room. The moonlight painted long, ghostly shadows across the warped floorboards, illuminating the forgotten corners where memories lingered like cobwebs. Mac ran a hand along the dusty banister, feeling the grit and age beneath his fingertips. His footsteps echoed in the cavernous hall, each step a reminder of how alone he truly was in this vast, crumbling estate. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and neglect, and every sound he made seemed to awaken the house, as if it were listening, waiting. He paused for a moment, listening to the echo fade, wondering if the house remembered the laughter and voices that once filled these halls. The mansion was a mausoleum of memories, none of them his own. Faded portraits stared down from the walls, their eyes following him with silent accusation, as if questioning his right to be here. Antique furniture draped in dust and shadow stood like sentinels guarding secrets he would never know. Mac felt like a trespasser in his own inheritance, a stranger among the relics of a family he barely remembered. The weight of history pressed down on him, making the grand, empty rooms feel even more immense and unwelcoming. Dinner had been cold canned soup, eaten in the spectral silence of the dining room. The vast table, once set for feasts and celebrations, now served only as a reminder of absence. The clink of his spoon against the bowl was the only sound, echoing off the high ceilings and faded wallpaper. It was always silent, save for the creaks and groans of the house settling around him, as if the mansion itself was sighing in its sleep. Sometimes Mac imagined he could hear whispers in the silence, the faint echoes of conversations long past. Each night the silence pressed in a little more, growing heavier with the darkness. He climbed the grand staircase, each step a heavy sigh beneath his weight, the wood protesting with tired creaks. The shadows seemed to gather at the top of the stairs waiting for him, and the air grew colder as he ascended. The house felt alive in its emptiness, every sound amplified, every silence deeper. Mac wondered if he would ever grow used to it, or if the silence would eventually swallow him whole. Sleep was a distant hope, a flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness of the house. Lying awake in the oppressive gloom, Mac listened to the wind rattling the windows and the distant mournful groans of the old mansion. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting into shapes that vanished when he tried to focus on them. The silence was a living thing, pressing against his thoughts, filling the room with memories that were not his own. Night after night, he waited for sleep to come, but it always hovered just out of reach, leaving him alone with the silence and the ghosts of the past. The flickering lamp on his nightstand cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every uncertain heartbeat. Each time the bulb sputtered, the room transformed, walls breathing, corners deepening, the familiar space shifting into something almost unrecognizable. The gentle hum of electricity was the only sound, a fragile thread holding the darkness at bay. Shadows crept along the walls, merging and separating, as if they had a life of their own, performing a silent ballet in the dim light. The lamp's glow was weak, but it was the only thing keeping the room from being swallowed whole by the night. Mac lay in the darkness, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his mind racing. He listened to the house whisper around him, the soft creak of settling wood, the distant tick of a clock, the faint sigh of wind against the window pane. Every sound seemed amplified, echoing in the silence, making the darkness feel alive and watchful. He pulled the covers tighter, as if they could shield him from the unknown lurking just beyond the reach of the lamp's glow. The air felt thick, charged with a tension he couldn't explain, as if the house itself was holding its breath. He was sure he could hear the faint rustling of something moving just beyond his perception, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle, like footsteps on old carpet or the brush of fabric against wood. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat loud in his ears. He sat up abruptly, eyes straining to pierce the gloom, searching for the source of the sound. The shadows seemed to shift in response, recoiling from his gaze, only to gather again in the corners of the room. Every instinct screamed that he was not alone, that something was watching from the darkness, waiting. In the doorway leading to his study, a darkness seemed to pool for a moment, deeper and more solid than the surrounding shadows. It was as if the night itself had gathered there, forming a shape that was almost but not quite human. The darkness lingered, pulsing with a silent energy before dissolving back into the ordinary gloom as quickly as it had appeared. Mac blinked, unsure if he had truly seen it or if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. The image lingered, burned into his memory, impossible to shake. He told himself it was a trick of the light, the shadows playing games in his exhausted mind. He tried to reason with himself, recalling stories of sleep deprivation and the mind's tendency to conjure phantoms in the dark. But the cold dread that settled in his stomach refused to be reasoned away. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, a knot that tightened with each passing hour. The room felt colder now, the air tinged with a chill that seemed to seep into his bones. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that darkness pooling in the doorway, waiting. Sleep wouldn't come, not tonight, not with the image of that fleeting darkness seared into his mind, haunting him every time he blinked. He lay there, eyes wide open, staring into the shifting shadows, listening to the house breathe and the lamp flicker. The night stretched on, endless and oppressive, each minute dragging him further from rest. Mac knew that when morning finally came, the memory of this night would linger, a reminder that sometimes the darkness holds more than just the absence of light. Days blurred into nights. Mac became obsessed, charting the movements of the shadow. He scribbled on yellowed parchment found in the attic, his room slowly filling with maps and diagrams. He marked each sighting with an X: the library, the foot of the stairs, the doorway of his study. The X's were like a trail of breadcrumbs leading him deeper into a maze of his own paranoia. He tried to rationalize it: a draft, a rat, anything but what his gut told him was true. But the shadows were growing bolder, lingering longer, appearing closer. He woke with a gasp, the feeling of being watched clinging to him like cobwebs. The house felt different, colder. Had the hallway always been this long? The shadows seemed deeper, hungrier. He walked the halls, his hand trailing along the wall, searching for something familiar. The wallpaper, once a faded floral pattern, seemed to writhe and twist as he watched. He found himself disoriented, lost in the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion. Rooms he swore he'd already checked reappeared, different yet the same. Panic welled in his chest, choking him. Sleep became his tormentor. Each night, as darkness crept through the crumbling halls of the mansion, he found himself dreading the moment his head touched the pillow. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant creaks of settling wood and the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind outside. But it wasn't the sounds that kept him awake. It was the feeling, the certainty, that something unseen lingered just beyond the edge of his vision, waiting for him to close his eyes. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt a presence watching him, cold and, hungry. It was as if the darkness itself had grown teeth, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. He would lie there, heart pounding, breath shallow, convinced that if he let himself drift off, he would never wake again. The sensation was so real, so suffocating, that he sometimes found himself gasping for air, clutching the sheets as if they could protect him from whatever lurked in the shadows. The moonlight seemed to warp and twist around the edges of his vision, forming shapes that vanished when he blinked. Sometimes he thought he saw faces in the shifting patterns, pale, mournful, and always watching. The silver glow would creep across the floor, illuminating corners that should have remained hidden, and casting long, unnatural shadows that danced and writhed as if alive. He began to wonder if the moon itself was an eye, peering in through the broken glass, searching for him. He began to sleep during the day, hiding from the watchful moon. The sunlight, though weak and filtered through layers of dust and grime, felt safer, less intrusive, But even then, his rest was shallow and filled with uneasy dreams. He would wake with a start, drenched in sweat, convinced that the moon had found a way to reach him even through the daylight hours. The fear never left him. It simply changed shape, lurking in the corners of his mind. He boarded up the windows, but the shadows found a way in, seeping through the cracks like poison gas. No matter how many boards he nailed in place, no matter how tightly he sealed the gaps, the darkness always returned. It crept along the floor, curled up the walls, and settled over him like a shroud. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, but deep down he knew the truth. The mansion was no longer his refuge. It belonged to the shadows now. He was a prisoner in his own home, held captive by something he couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't even name. The rooms that once offered comfort now felt like cages, each doorway a threshold to deeper fear. He moved through the house like a ghost, afraid to linger in any one place for too long, always feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The isolation pressed in on him, making every sound, every shadow a potential threat. His sanity, like the light in the mansion, flickered precariously. Some nights he would sit in the darkness, clutching a candle, watching the flame dance and sputter, hoping it would keep the shadows at bay. But the light was never enough. It always seemed to falter just when he needed it most, leaving him alone with the darkness and the ever-watchful moon. He began to anticipate the shadow's movements, using his maps to predict its next appearance. Armed with an old, rusty hammer, he lay in wait, his breath catching in his throat with every flicker of the lamps. But the shadow always seemed to be one step ahead, appearing where he least expected it, toying with him. He was the mouse caught in the cat's game. His reflection in a dusty mirror startled him. His eyes were wild, his hair a tangled mess. He looked like a stranger, a ghost haunting the halls of his own mind. He barricaded himself in his bedroom, dragging furniture to block the door. He hammered nails into the door frame, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the hammer. He was building a cage, but he wasn't sure if it was to keep something out or to trap himself in with his madness. The air grew thick and heavy, the silence so profound it was almost a physical presence. He was a fly caught in amber, suspended in his own private hell. He stood in the center of the room, a single candle casting long, dancing shadows. It was a trap, a desperate gamble. He would face the shadow, force it into the open. He waited, his heart a drumbeat in the silence. The air grew colder, the flame of the candle sputtering. In the reflection of a silver picture frame, he saw it. This time, it didn't flee. It glided closer, a void in the dim candlelight. It was almost within reach. He spun around, hammer raised. But the room was empty. He stood there, a statue frozen in a scream that died in his throat. A chill snaked down his spine, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. Then the candle flickered once and died. He was engulfed in darkness, the shadow's cold embrace enveloping him. He was no longer the hunter, but the hunted.